Good Lord. I want to call the order.
Recording in progress.
I want to call the order of the Children's Trust of Alachua County. Let's see, what month is this? September meeting. And at this point, what I want to do is I want to start out with an announcement. And any member of the public wishing to be heard shall come forward to the podium at the appropriate time and introduce themselves to the board. Members of the public recognized by the chair will have 3 minutes to speak on a single subject matter or to address the current motion on the floor. The clerk of the trust will function as the official timekeeper. The clerk will now, if she will be so kind, as to do the roll call.
Member Andrews.
Present.
Member Sturgeon.
Here.
Member Chance.
Here.
Member Cornell.
Here.
Member Ferrero. Member Hart. Member Lavarga. Member Pinkerton.
Here.
Member Twombly.
Here.
And Ashley, you said that Dr. Hart wasn't online, right? Nobody else is either? Okay, I'll skip that one. All right. The next item would be the approval of the agenda and consent agenda, unless there are any changes. Are there any changes? Okay.
Move approval of the agenda and consent agenda.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any discussion by the board? Any public discussion? There being none, all those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion is unanimous. The next item will be the general public comments that we spoke about earlier. If anybody would like to talk to the board about anything that's really not on the agenda, this would be the appropriate time to do it, and you have 3 minutes to do so. Going once, going twice. Okay, moving right along. Madam Director,
Yes,
it's your floor.
thank you, sir. Good afternoon, everybody.
Oh, there's one thing. There was I apologize. In the general public comments, there was something from the public.
Yes, sir.
That you wanted to bring up.
Yes, sir. We received an email from citizen Betty Jo Hickox, I believe is the pronunciation of her last name. I'm going to read the email and then I will address it. The comments are, as a taxpayer in Alachua County, I would request that CTAC reduce your budget and therefore the percentage of taxes you will receive. The accumulated fund balance should be sufficient to fund your programs. In parentheses, yes, I understand what fund balance means, happy face. Question, what will happen to the building purchased with tax dollars at the end of the period allotted for funding with tax dollars when CTAC no longer exists? This would be good informational item to be discussed. So that was the email, the response to the question, what would happen if at the end of the period CTAC no longer exists? Then the CTAC building and all funds that remain would return to the county. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. Okay, you want to continue on, Marcia?
Yes, sir. So I have a couple of items I wanted to highlight in the Executive Director report. One was the grants, and I see that Member Hart has joined us via Zoom. Welcome. The grants conference held by the Community Foundation and the Center for Nonprofit Excellence back a couple of weeks ago was a resounding success. It was sponsored by the Trust. Therefore, when I say sponsored, that means that the over 100 nonprofit leaders who attended were able to attend for free. The training was phenomenal. There was a speaker who came in from Cleveland who talked to them about best practices for nonprofits, for applying for grants. There were breakout sessions with local leaders who are grants, if you will, experts. I think that it was a great kickoff to our partnership with the Center for Nonprofit Excellence, and we are looking forward to more of these kinds of trainings in the future. So I wanted to highlight that as just an example of how we are building capacity in our community for our nonprofits, specifically our nonprofit providers as well as others. Second item I wanted to highlight was our training held again about 2 weeks ago for our Flourish Alachua postpartum doula training and certification. It was a 2-day training held at Santa Fe College downtown. I had the opportunity to sit in on a session on Saturday, and although I am not a doula, not looking to become a doula, it was so interesting that instead of the 30 minutes I thought I would pop in and just say hello to the ladies, I wound up sitting there well over, I don't know, almost 2 hours, Mia. It was just a great conversation. They were so diverse in background, from a nurse at HCA to a relatively new mom who expressed that her going through the process of having a child and understanding all of the different changes and things that she felt she needed, she wanted to be of support to the community and other women who were going through the process. Again, I was just inspired by what we are doing for moms in our community, and I'm looking forward to seeing how these young ladies, when they finish this training, what kind of impact they may be able to have. And then lastly, as you know, we were able to do some promotions within the trust. Christy Goldwire is now our Chief Operating Officer. It is official, and it is official. Scott has come on board as our Chief Financial Officer, so I am excited to announce those title changes. And then I believe Amali. Will you stand up, Amali? Amali Bethune joined us as a program specialist on staff with the trust, and we have 2 others that are not here, but I want to recognize Thomas Hill and Janine Cedar as our 2 budget specialists. So when you have an opportunity, please welcome them to the team.
Will do so.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Congratulations to both y'all and to the new people. You know, welcome aboard. Great organization, in my opinion, anyway. Next item would be the after-school program results, and I believe Bonnie's going to do that. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Kristen.
Good afternoon. Let me get this right. I think Ashley's bringing up my PowerPoint. My voice is a little weak. I'm recovering from pneumonia, so I might be I have to take a couple pauses, but we're going to try this. I'm excited to share the results with you for the year 3 of the after-school program results. I know I had...
See what happens when you go part-time? I'm sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
So for our year 3, I know I gave an overview the last time, went over broadly our goals for the program, the logic model, the programs that we partner with to deliver these programs. So on our next slide, should look pretty familiar to you. So this past year, we served 415 youth in our after-school programs, which is more than in the 2 previous years, and all our providers exceeded the goals set for the youth served in this past fiscal year. Next slide. Who are the youth served? So the average age of the youth served is 10.1 years old. The majority, 2/3 of the youth that we are serving are elementary school aged, followed by 22% middle schoolers and 11% high schoolers. More than 2/3 of youth served are Black or African American, followed by white, multiracial, and other races. The majority are female versus male, and then the majority are also non-Hispanic youth. On the next slide, we look at the program locations and then the youth served by their city of residence. So we have our 9 program locations throughout Alachua County, mostly in the city of Gainesville, and then our Micanopy site and our High Springs site. The majority of our youth served are from the city of Gainesville, followed by Micanopy and High Springs, thanks to having those locations, and then a few youth are residing in other outlying towns. On our next slide is the scholarship eligibility. So all our youth have to meet at least one of these eligibility criteria, and then if they have an IEP or 504 plan with the school district, they must also be under 200%. So 57% of our youth have incomes below 200% of the federal poverty line. 33% of families receive SNAP benefits, and 26% do have an IEP or 504 plan with the school district, which is much higher than the school district's rate of 14.4% of youth who have an IEP or 504 plan. 6% are in foster care, formal kinship care, or under case management supervision. So these scholarships are need-based, based on either economic or other circumstances, and these aren't mutually exclusive. There are they can be under 200% and also be receiving food stamps and also have an IEP plan. So these won't add up to 100%. On the next slide, how much programming was offered. So all of our providers that were with us for the full school year were required to provide 150 days of programming, and all of the providers exceeded that. We did have one provider, William A. Stokes Center, that we added October 1st, so they had a lesser target for that, but all the providers exceeded their target and did really well on that. For enrichment programming, starting this past school year, we added an enrichment programming target for our middle school and high school programs that had served 10 or more youth that were in middle or high school, and they anticipated serving those youth. They were supposed to offer at least one of each of these content enrichment areas. So for middle school, that included transition to high school, career exploration, healthy relationship boundaries, internet and social media safety, and social emotional development. High schoolers were supposed to offer at least one of 6 activities listed, and then in the table it shows how many days of programming were offered by those 3 programs combined. So not all of our 7 after-school providers served high numbers of middle or high school, but the ones that did have this as one of their performance measures, and that's what, in combination, they offer. On the next slide, we go into how much youth participate. So this was the question that came up last time, and on average, so as I mentioned, that all providers had to offer at least 150 days. A lot of them exceeded that, and you'll see that in the last column, the program days offered, and then the youth attended on average 105 days of programming, so you'll see the range of days by provider as well. So relative to all the days offered, youth attended 60% of the days, but relative to the time that they were enrolled, their first date and last date of attendance, because some youth might have not signed up on day 1, some youth might have closed before. So relative to their opening, to the time they were active in the program, the average was 74 days. And I added a bar chart to show you why we added the enrichment to the middle and high school, because the average days of attendance in elementary school is 111 days. Then when we get to middle school, it goes down to 98 days. And in high school, it's 86 days. And that's because there's other clubs, they might be babysitting, they might get employment, but we want to make sure when they do attend that they're attending meaningful and enriching content. On the next slide, looks at duration. So that isn't the number of days, but the length of time that they're enrolled from the first day they attended through the last date they attended. On average, youth attended 7.5 months, and 84% attended 84% attended 4 months or longer. And then in the beginning, on my narrative, the 63% of children were enrolled the whole school year, and then 37% exited either early or came in later. On our next slide, we have the days of participation. So this is just another way of looking at participation. I know that was mentioned as an area of interest. So 72% of the youth attended at least 75 days, and that kind of shows the distribution of how many youth and what attendance bracket they fell into. So I just brought this up in case there was any more interest or in the detail of how much youth attended. On the next slide, looks at the enrichment content. So this was for middle and high schoolers and the attendance within each enrichment content area. So for our middle schoolers, healthy relationship boundaries was very well attended as a topic. And then for our high schoolers, academic support and enrichment was very well attended. We can also see the areas where there wasn't so much attendance, like career exploration, workforce development. And then middle school also had career exploration. So again, opportunities for improvement, seeing where to maybe focus on bringing in more enrichment providers. On the next slide, looks at, so we had a performance measure for our middle and high school youth that of the 5 topic areas, we wanted to see that the middle schoolers attended at least 3 or more of those 5. So 37% attended 3 or more of the enrichment content areas, so wasn't even close to what our target was of 75%. For our high schoolers, 71% attended 3 or more of the enrichment content areas, which was the performance measures for that. So that came a bit closer to where we were hoping for. So again, but this was the first time this measure was introduced, and we hope to be able to increase this next year. I know the providers already have plans to bring in some of our new enrichment providers that we hopefully will be funding later tonight. On the next slide, we introduced measurement of social emotional skills in the past fiscal year. And this was really inspired by looking at the youth and parents' satisfaction responses, seeing how when we asked parents, how is this program impacting you? Parents would say they would see their child's self-esteem increase. They would see their child gaining social skills, learning how to persist, be responsible. And so those were all great anecdotal things, but we wanted to measure this as a whole. You know, these were all related back to social emotional skills, which are so important for youth's development. So we introduced a way of to measure it. Providers had the option to select which tool they wanted to use, and they would do a pre at the beginning of the year, and youth that were still with us at the end of the year would get a post. And so we looked at the data for the pre and post for all the youth that were enrolled 4 months or longer. And on the next slide shows overall there was 64% of youth experienced improvements. And again, there wasn't any standard curriculum. This was just business as usual, the after-school providers doing what they regularly do with kids. Some of our providers do have social emotional components in their program, but it wasn't something that we mandated across the board. So this was their business as usual. And of course, we want to see that professional development and that additional training could be provided to maybe even enhance this a bit more. But this shows the 4 assessment tools we used, the percent of pre-post improvement, and then also proficiency or improvement, because if their skills were already proficient at pre, there might not be any room to improve, so that kind of sometimes will mask some of the fact that things are okay with some of these kids. They might already be proficient. So that's what the proficiency or improved. So that's the percent that were either showed proficient skills in social emotional skills, or they improved from where they were previously. Next slide goes over performance measures. So this shows their targets for children for all grade levels and what the actuals were. So we exceeded children enrolled, program days. The overall experience for everybody combined was 95% for all assessments and surveys combined. The results on the homework help. Also with the youth assessed in social emotional skills, we had a target that they would just complete these assessments to learn. And they 95% of the youth that were eligible for the assessment were actually assessed. So I was pretty proud that they were able to get all the data and do a really good job with that as well. For our elementary school level performance measures is on the next slide. So that was again 2/3 of our youth served are in elementary school. Their attendance target was above expectations. Their communication satisfaction very high, overall experience satisfaction with homework help, program safety, and again they had a very high assessment rates for the social emotional skills. For our middle school and high schoolers on the next slide, we introduced quite a few measures with them this year, trying to, again, knowing that they're not having the daily attendance rate, but wanting to see the enrichment content rate. I think with the newness of this, some of the targets weren't met. I don't think it's that they're not necessarily, that they are doing enrichment content. I think getting it in there and understanding how to do it, I think also bringing in more and becoming more intentional on that would be an area for improvement. But then some of these targets were not met at the middle and high school level. So on our next slide, these are moving forward for our elementary school measures.
May I interrupt?
Yes.
Member Labardo has a question.
Hi, Bonnie. This is amazing data. Just a question about the enrichment. Did the kids pick? So there's a provider who's bringing in an enrichment activity. I'm there that day. Do I get to choose whether I participate in that activity that day?
I mean, I assume so. That they
So-
would need to offer
Right.
and say, hey, who wants to go to transition to high school? And
Right, because I can just see middle schoolers and high schoolers going, ooh, relationships?
Yeah.
Boys, girl? Yeah, I could go there. Versus transition to high school or college or workforce? And so I'm wondering how much we're seeing some self-selection as well. I just wanted to make sure I was not mistaking that. Thank you.
Yeah, that's definitely a possibility. So these are our 25 performance measures for our after-schoolers. So a lot of them are the same. Youth enrolled, they all have a target for that. Days programming is the same target. That they attend at least 65% of program days, 75% of kids want to see that or more. And then the same satisfaction with communication, the overall program experience. But what I wanted to point out with this is we did add the performance measure for, now that we know our baseline for the percent of youth that demonstrate or maintain proficiency on their social emotional skills. Now this is a target that will be included for youth that are in the program 4 months or longer. So this will be now an official performance measure now that we know what our baseline is. And then for high schoolers and middle schoolers, they basically have much of these same measures. They also still have that they'll offer their enrichment content areas, and that youth will attend, 75% of youth will attend at least 3 out of the 5 activities, so they get that exposure to the youth development content. And they also have the social emotional skill gains. So that's my presentation, and I welcome any questions.
Questions? Ken? Y'all have questions? Okay. Ken and Mary?
So great report. I feel like we've had a propeller plane and you're literally building a jet while we're flying, and it's and to see the level of detail compared to where we were a couple of years ago, and now to have some baseline established. I don't really have any questions in the conclusion paragraph, seeing that 57% of the kids that we're serving are 200% below the federal poverty guidelines. 33% are on SNAP. 26% are with a special education plan. I mean, we are targeting kids that, but not for the trust, might not have an after-school program to participate in. And I think that's really, really super. To see the attendance, which was a big thing that we really, to the chair's point, really, like, we're going to hold you accountable, and to see how that has improved. Great work. To see and read some of the customer satisfaction from the parents shows really, really great work. I guess my real only question, Bonnie, for you is, taking this data now, what's the next step for sitting down with the providers and kind of planning for, I guess we're already into the next school year, but how are we measuring 24, 25?
I shared some of the performance measures on the last couple of slides. What we did do is we met with the providers on July 31st. We had our after-school convening. That was a kind of a joint planning, sharing, reflection opportunity to share the results. Each of them received their own little site profile that shows just for their program how they did, where for their kids, where were their social emotional skills, where were was it more of which areas specifically they might want to target, if it was persistence, self-regulation, emotional regulation. So they got to see their own individual data. I sent them actually their satisfaction results with all their comments, which they loved that, because sometimes the youth they say very, very colorful comments about what they like and what they don't like. I don't know if you read some of them in the report, but yeah, I think they like to be able to give their input. So we're also going to be continuing to convene the after-school providers. We're trying to create more of a network and collaborative partnership where we're getting together. I think we want to meet at least twice, if not more, a year to come back together. So I think we're planning our next one for possibly January, where we're getting together and reviewing the results and offering professional developments. We have a LMS system, learning management system in SAMUS, and we also are part of the Florida After School Network, so there's lots of opportunities to...
So what I'm hearing is, of the 7 providers, and I'll just use like ACE's Emotion as an example, 60% attendance rate, we're working with them to come up with a plan to improve that, to make that higher. Is that based on these results? I'm hearing that you kind of gave each of them, here's all your data, and now how can we work on improving certain parts based on other best practices?
Well, with them specifically, I know they were really looking to gear up on their enrichment and wanting to learn how to track it. So what I did I'm just using them as an example, but they invited us, Demetrika and I, to come out to really hone in on the SAMUS training to make sure they knew how to enter it, but also they're very curious on learning who out there in the community is providing enrichment services, how they can tap into our enrichment providers that we will be funding to come to their site and offer some of the great content to the kids.
Okay, I love that. I mean, I think to the extent we can collaborate with other providers to improve the experience, I think that's great. And having the data now for each of them, looking at next year, seeing how they can improve or where they're focusing their efforts, I think is also really, really important. So, great report. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Ken stole my questions. I did notice, I think I received an invitation this week to the After School Networks conference coming up. I don't know if you take part or any of their professional development or conference networking opportunities, but just happened to notice that. Okay.
Yes. We have a relationship with them. We partner with them as it relates to a lot of our trainings that are coming up also in fiscal year 25. There's a request for us to be on some of their advisory committees so that we can share what we've learned as it relates to our after school, what can we learn from our other CSEs that are participating with them also. And then we do have a newer membership with the National After School, where we are also bringing additional information back to Alachua County so that it helps us to enhance and improve upon what we're doing here in our county.
Great. And just one last comment. There's, as far as enrichment free resources, there's a new repository through the Department of Ed in Florida that was built with the USF Student Mental Health Collaborative. It's called buildresiliency.org, and there's a lot of free downloadable resources on, working with kids on perseverance, grit, service. There's recommended readings and parent activities, so there's a lot that could be pulled down there that's sort of plug and play.
Thank you.
Are you done? Oh, I had a question whenever you're.
Okay, Member Sorton, then Member Hart, and then I'll get you, Member Farrar.
Thank you, Chair Peterson. Thank you, Bonnie, for the presentation. You mentioned about the collaboration hope that you're trying to put together between the providers, and I was wondering if Boost still exists. I see Christy in the back, the Better Out of School Time. Are you all building upon that Boost Foundation that was initially formed?
I don't know if we, oh, go ahead.
So Boost, if it is still in existence, I am unaware of it. We were told it wasn't, and that was around the time that Addison was with Aces in Motion. However, we are working with the same organizations that were a part of that. Our after-school convening was well attended, and so I think that we are not only bringing them together, but getting feedback from them. They are telling us what they'd like to know, what speakers they're interested in, what policies or resources they need to enhance, the components of their after-school programs. So Christy might know more about Boost. I don't know where exactly she's at.
And while she's coming, my other question was, Member Chance mentioned about the After School Network Conference. I'm wondering if any of our providers are possibly accompanying staff to these trainings. I'm not sure if they're in person or whatever, but if that's something that we may be trying to build up the providers so that they will have increased capacity to serve the youth.
Absolutely. We do share that information with our providers. We also just had a meeting with Lily Murphy, who is over Florida After School Network, and so we're providing that to them. We have credentialing through our membership that we share with our providers through Florida After School Network. And they even get a discount because we are a member if they'd like to participate in that conference also.
Okay, good to hear. Thank you.
Chrissy, Ms. Arrington.
So, Christy Arrington, Executive Director of Girls Place. Boost did fade away because it was Executive Director led. And so when Children's Trust started, a big part of it was advocacy. And that, I would say, is the biggest piece missing, is that we are advocating for ourselves in all areas, whether it's with the city, the county, with you all. So I think that's the biggest piece missing. The professional development has been huge and wonderful. And I agree with Christy that the trust is really taking feedback. Something I was going to email was perhaps sending after-school providers to the conference because that's not something that we can afford. And so I think that would be a good added piece.
That was the question that was really what my question was about them.
Is that your question?
No, that was my question about them going to the conferences versus just the staff for, them attending because
I'd be happy to see that as part of their proposed budgets, there's conference attendance for next year.
But they may not know. Well, I guess if they share the info with them, they'll know
how
much they can include it in there. Right.
I would not mind at all if those budgets included some training dollars for staff and to participate, or even to be members of something like that. That would bring that kind of benefit.
Yes, ma'am.
Hearing that come from you all, I think that the trust would be able to look at our budget and be able to find some dollars to assist with, at minimum one person per organization to attend that conference. So we would be able to make that happen.
Thank you, Marcia. Member Hart.
Hi, everybody. I think I've asked this question before, but I'm having amnesia what the answer was, or maybe I don't know what the answer is, and I wonder if anybody else has this question. Does anyone understand why it costs so much for a child to participate in circus, and why we give them so much money for such a small number of children?
So the circus was funded under an original RFP. And when that RFP was released, there was no restriction in it based on per child per cost. What we allowed was for the organizations to determine the cost for the type of camp that they had. There are some camps, STEM camps, arts camps. Circus camp is a lot more expensive than a camp that is just focused on a safe place for kids to be. They put on circuses. They practice circus acts. She's buying stilts and props and costumes and that sort of thing. They are learning to be acrobats in her camp. And so it is a little bit more expensive. However, what you will start to see us focusing on is asking you all more specific questions about ranges. And we're being more prescriptive as it relates to days and duration and hours and how much we want to fund in a camp. And so yes, her camp is expensive. Yes, we did allow that because that is the type of application we released. But moving forward, you will hear us asking very specific questions to the board. We'll ask those same very specific questions to providers, and we'll let you all know how they feel as it relates to those changes. And then the board will make some final decisions about what you want to fund and if you want to cap attendance and per child per cost rates so that we can make some final decisions in that RFP.
And Dr. Hart, I appreciate you bringing that up because that's actually something I'm going to bring up later with the enrichment because there's an issue on that one as well. And so hopefully we'll have a overall conversation about whether we want to have some sort of policy in place for that. So thank you very much. Member Brewer?
Well, I have a similar question. It's on page 75 of the report, Bonnie, where that was an excellent report. It really gave a lot of good information, and certainly the way you provided it was excellent. So I had a question. I remember that we talked about paying for a certain number of days, and we had to give some leeway to people because they couldn't sometimes come every day, but the provider needed to have some sure money. I remember that. But for example, if you look at that, Girls Place has 196 program days offered and 153 days of average attendance. I assume we're paying for 196 days? Is that how it works?
Which was the highest.
Yeah.
No.
How does it work? How do we, alternatively, the Gainesville Circus has 190 days of program offered and only 88 days used. So if I'm fine with that kind of percentage between 153 and 196, but 88 and 190 is significantly a problem, I think, and I just don't know how we're paying for it. That's when I say we, I mean the trust. How is the trust paying for it?
So with after school, we're paying for the program, and whether a participant shows up or not, we are paying for that provider to be prepared for the number of children that are showing up. So we're not necessarily paying for, sorry, I'm going to fall out the chair if I don't put this together. There are no arms on this thing. All right. And I've taken over. I apologize. And so we're not necessarily paying per day, but we are paying them to run that camp for that number of days.
I guess my issue is that what are they doing to attract people? Because I feel like if we're paying them to run the camp for 190 days and they're only getting 88 days worth of kids, then that seems to me maybe not so great.
It's also it's an average, right? So that's
I think
it's an where
I think page 79 is actually we're paying the.
it's also the average of.
So you can see the program cost.
On average.
And then the investment for child, and so what you're saying is how can we get more kids into the circus?
Right, I mean, we're paying-
because
we're
the girls'
paying-
place and the circus are getting the same funding.
Right. Christy Arrington is getting, her group is getting 44, and she's getting 57 kids. And the circus we're paying 59, 60, 77, and she's getting 22 kids. I think that's a significant problem. That's a lot of money. I understand there's extra activities and extra things, but I bet you anything if we give Christy Arrington $33,000 more, she could buy some more equipment. I'm sorry, Christy, to use you as an example, but I mean, I'm just guessing that if we gave her more money, she could buy some more balls and some more volleyball nets and whatever. Maybe staff a bus.
Yeah.
What's the number? That goes into the plan. What's the number?
Right. So that's what I wanted to talk about.
Yeah, so can I follow up on that?
Yes.
So, and I guess for me, the driver is less the cost than the outcome. So if learning to be an acrobat was yielding phenomenally greater outcomes in terms of some of the things we're trying to address, then I would say that cost, I might think about that cost differently, but if the outcomes being achieved are relatively the same, then that's an awfully high cost per child for that outcome, which kind of leads me to, I think, given this amount of data and given that now I think you guys are getting some consistency around the data you're collecting, it would be nice to start seeing some trend data, the year-over-year kind of data, to begin to see if we're pulling up some of the performance, if we're really improving and enhancing the outcomes as we add enrichment, as we refine it. But I think, for me, it's not about the per child cost. I want to look at what the outcomes are for that.
Ken?
And I'd like to see more kids be able to go.
Yeah, and my feeling is, I hear you, Judge. I think that's really important. I've really focused in on the second paragraph of the conclusion page, which is on page 95. And all things being equal, I agree with you 100%. If we can serve more kids for the same amount of money, obviously I'm all in favor of that. But when I look at the kids that we're serving, and I don't know that breakout by program. I really don't. I mean, that may be the next level that we get to. I want to fund programs that are being offered to kids that, but not for those programs, they wouldn't be in after school, because that deals directly to Maggie's point about outcomes. And so I am happy to pay more per child if they're the kids that wouldn't be in after school if they didn't have the programming. So I think this is, again, we're now able to have like these discussions with data, which we weren't able to have, and I'm just so pleased with that, and I think we can now hone in on making more effective use of some funding for especially certain programs that are targeting the areas that this trust wants to target. And kudos to the Girls Place. I mean, your numbers all across the board, Christy, top on number of days available, just really, really great results. So congratulations.
Okay, everybody ask questions? Okay, my turn. This is the the discussion that we need to have as a board, as far as, because enrichment is coming up. So, question I wrote on here, we see attendance rate. What would we like to see the attendance rate be? That's something that we can put in as a performance measure. And I think it was 75% before. Mm-hmm. And some of the questions, the question I had was, one of the questions that I had was, what goes into the 4 months that it gave a allocation of, that they attended 4 months. So I guess, Bonnie, this goes to you. Does that mean that the children dropped out, or they started late, or what? That was a number that was thrown with. But first of all, let me tell you what a good job you did with this. Okay, this report is really good. But I'm I'm nitpicking now. So, but overall, it's just this is the kind of information that we need so that we can show people what we're doing. So, as far as that 4 months number, what does that mean?
So for the 4 months, I wanted enough time between the pre and the post to be able to have change occur in their social emotional skills. So the pre would, and we didn't want to do a pre and post and then analyze the data if they only had been there for maybe 2 weeks, or not as sufficient enough time to let the program affect change in the youth. So that's what the 4 months was, just to make sure that there was enough time between the 2 assessment periods.
Okay, because some of them, like Aces in Motion, it was 8.4 months of participation, and William A. Stokes isn't really represented because they started late.
Yeah.
But there's a 6.1 and a 7.1. So, is it the reason? I guess I'm looking for is the reason they didn't participate fully. Is it because they weren't interested, or the program wasn't exciting enough for them, or are there other variables? Things that is there something that we can do, or is there are some of the things that go into that month allocation that is beyond our control?
Well, Aces in Motion had 97% of their youth attend for 4 months or more. So the kids are staying around, but their attendance isn't as regular as other programs. And that's typical of kids that are in high school and middle school because they have other things going on. There's extracurriculars, there's sports. They might have babysitting responsibilities of their younger siblings. So that's why we introduced the enrichment content, and it hasn't quite taken hold yet, but I'm hoping that it will. But they are still involved. They haven't dropped out completely because they had participation at the beginning of the year and then again at the end of the year. So they are staying involved with and connected with ACES, but their attendance rate isn't necessarily as high.
Okay, so I guess my question is, are we going to be able to, will y'all be able to come up with some sort of performance measure that will indicate to us whether or not the children are interested in the program and they want to be at the program, as opposed to we've got a program that's being offered that's not very well attended because the kids don't want to attend it?
Yeah, and we just started a youth satisfaction survey this year. We just had parent-child, and we're like, hey, parents, get your kids' input as well. But we now ask the youth directly if they're in middle or high school, and you can see some of the items with that. So they can rate whether they think the activities are bad, good, okay, great. So they can give their feedback. They also gave comments on what they liked least or what they liked most about the program. So that feedback is received and asked of the youth.
And y'all set a standard for that as well?
Yes, they have an overall satisfaction as a performance measure. They have satisfaction with the homework help, which isn't one of their favoreth things, but we still do want to. So that's something
that we think is important, and whether it's not liked or not, or not, we want it there, just so it's offered. So that one, if it's not, we just have to accept the fact that the kids aren't really excited about that. Yeah. Okay.
If I could.
Yeah.
Do we know if any of these programs had wait lists that, as far as slots that we couldn't fund because, they were full? Yes? Because that tells me something too. Like if I had a program that didn't have any kids on the wait list and they said they were full, and then I had other programs that had 40 kids that were trying to get in and couldn't,
Yep.
I might readjust some funding based on that.
Everybody did meet and exceed their target. So and I see some thumbs up. So.
Okay, one last question, and it's kind of a series, and I'll shut up. On your strengths and difficulty questionnaires, on the various ones, overall you gave that they were really high marks on everything, but what was concerning on pages 88 and 90 and 91, if you look at that pie graph that you've given, and 92. There's a lot of them that have declined, okay, and I didn't really feel like the numbers that were given reflected that decline, because if they improved, how can you have an 18% decline or a 24% or a 37 or a 32% decline?
Which
that? I think it's a different metric.
Page 88.
88 is 88, 89, 90, and 91 and 92.
Those are different.
And they're all different.
Tools?
They're all
Yeah,
different
different tools.
standards, but
Yeah.
they show.
Okay. For 88 is okay. So at the low on the strengths and difficulties is good because that means they're not showing difficulties. So the youth on their total difficulties, they increase the amount of children that are showing a low amount of difficulties. So that's a good thing. And then they also decrease the percentage of youth that had high difficulties. So the assessment tool developer gave criteria for what's considered a higher than average level of difficulties. And then you can see for the post, the percentage of low increasing for the strengths and difficulties is a good thing. The pro-social you want to see.
It's the pie chart that I'm worried about.
Oh, okay. I'm looking at 88.
Yeah, what's 18%?
Okay, yeah, 18% did decline, so that could have been just a 1 point decline in score. So,
But that doesn't really and I think that was the lowest one. I didn't really feel that that was reflected in the bar. It seemed to me that there's that somehow that needs to be explained somehow.
Oh, yeah, because the bars are looking at groupings, like whether they're high, medium, low, versus the improvement is looking if they've gone down or up at all in any increment.
Because in my opinion, they're doing this, and what we're looking for is that there's a decline. It shouldn't be
Yeah.
very much. And on one of these is 39% on page 92.
Yeah, so we can definitely. One thing I looked at in the data was what items came up as having a high level of need, and like if there was something like social awareness was something, or when I'm frustrated, like I know how to handle my stress, and if there was a lot of kids that rated this is something I have difficulty with, then that might be an opportunity to introduce some content to help. How do I deal with a high level of stress, or how do I handle my emotions in those situations? So again, this is baseline information. The desires to learn from it. I mean, there are other factors beyond the after-school program going on in these children's life that will affect these numbers too. If they experienced a loss or a trauma, or maybe they just had a bad day at school the day the assessment was taken. We obviously hope to see all the youth improve, but sometimes that's not going to happen. And so,
Overall, the bar graphs look like everything pretty much improved. But the pie charts don't necessarily reflect that. So if I know that you do an awful lot, Bonnie, I know how busy you are. But if we get an explanation about what's going on with the pie charts, that would be very helpful.
okay.
Is the pie chart like an accumulation of all the metrics together in your?
So the pie chart is looking at all the kids that were assessed. If they had 100, and then they had 101, did that go up or down? If it going up is good, then it's an improvement. If it's the same score, it's no change. And if
But I
it
think
goes down,
it's a total score, though,
Yeah,
right?
and
So
then-
the bar
and then
graphs are
looking at-
individual things, right?
yeah. And then the bar graph is looking where they
That's
fall.
what I was thinking. The bar was individual, and the pie is a compilation of all the
Exactly.
metrics together. That's why it
Yeah.
looks a little wacky in the sense of
Well,
the
in that case, maybe
decline.
there needs to be a pre and post for the pie chart as well. I'm dead serious. I mean, that way we can.
So it's not
Or I
together.
could show an average score,
the beginning.
and show. But I thought showing where they fell, whether they were, because some of these they have suggested, okay, if they score under a 10, that means they're good. They have proficient social emotional skills. These are average, and then these are, kind of areas that we want to improve, or kids that may be struggling with their social. So that's what the bars represent versus the pie charts represent just their numeric raw score, whether it went up, down, or no difference.
Okay. All right. I'm done. So, any other questions? Bonnie, thank you very much. And is there any questions from anybody in the public about the presentation?
Christy, are you coming up to address the lack of Nutella? I'm just kidding you, but that comment on page 85 was hysterical to me.
I did hear about that. Kids are always going to have comments about food, for sure. I just wanted to advocate, with the social emotional learning, Bonnie said that there's not a requirement to do social emotional skill development. The requirement is just to do the assessment. And so it's a bigger question about what intentional programming is happening in each of the providers. For us, we use SEE out of Emory University, and there's not a direct assessment. And so that's why we found the WCSD from a school system, because it feels like a better connection between the curriculum that we deliver and the assessment. The strengths, that assessment just doesn't feel right for us, and I know a lot of people are utilizing it, but you also have to understand that social emotional learning is going to be a roller coaster. And so as we're putting in data for our middle schoolers, I was shocked because some of them were solid. Like, I absolutely know that the look on your face is disgust. The look on your face is sadness at the beginning of the year. And the end of the year, they didn't rank themselves as high. And so it does depend on where you are in your life. I regretted giving an assessment to one child who was just like down in the dumps, but I had to get it done. So day to day, they're how they feel about themselves, how they feel about the world is going to be changing. And so my fear, and I shared this with Christy and Bonnie in the beginning, is that as an organization, we're going to be graded, and I'll put that in quotes, based on the social emotional development of our kids at any given time. And so ideally, we're looking over time to see that as a whole, the organization is growing and that our kids are growing, and not that this particular year, the social emotional development of our children was a little bit less than it was at the beginning. Thank you.
And Chair Pinkerton, can I also add that, and sitting here, we've had good conversation, is that the 3 hours that most of these kids are in after school, I don't want us to have such a high standard on an after school provider for them to fix all ills in the 3 hours, right? And for it to show in data. Because I have to be reflective and say that the organization that I represent has them for 6 hours, and there are some metrics that we don't do real good on, right? With certain demographics of students, and nobody's raising HE double hockey sticks with them when we really should, because there's a lot of money that is going into educate students, and we're not serving them well. So we got to look reflectively at ourselves in that. But I don't want us to put that big of a burden on after school providers, because they only have them for 3 hours.
Yeah.
And
I want to highlight what Christy.
Wait, I was getting ready to go there too. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead. I'm going to let the mental health professional go ahead and do that, because I think you'll do better.
Okay, so child and adolescent development is cyclical, and it goes through periods of regulation and dysregulation. And every time a child is going to take a developmental leap, there's a period of dysregulation. Emotional, behavioral, all kinds of things kind of fall apart and reconstitute. And so I think where we're going to see the change is over time, is, the kids that have been going to Girls Place or ACEs or any of these programs for several years, we should begin to see a more longitudinal and upward trajectory. We've got to remember this is baseline data. It's like we're all hungry for it, and we're all just sitting here gobbling it up. But we need to be patient with seeing the results, and I do, and I've seen a lot of improved, not improved, and the standard is 33% get better, 33% don't, and 33% get worse. So if I'm seeing numbers that are higher on the get better side, I'm happy.
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Isabel Brazel. I'm the youth coordinator at the Gainesville Circus Center. I'm an alumni of Gainesville High School in 2018. I also wanted to just reiterate what Ms. Certain said and give some more insight into the data that Bonnie shared about the trends of socio-emotional well-being. Our program used the strength and difficulties specific assessment tool, and I've brought this up to the CTAC staff, and I just felt that specifically for the strength and difficulties, it did not provide space for a lot of our students who are neurodivergent or show any other difference in expression. So, for example, some of the questions were, does this student have trouble focusing or sitting still? A child with ADHD or autism is not going to score well on these types of tests, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're failing at developing socially and emotionally. So that's just something that I wanted to bring up to the board as something that we should also take note of, as I feel that a lot of these tests aren't necessarily inclusive of all of the children that we have in our program, many of which are neurodivergent students. So, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Any further comments? Ken?
This last thing, I know we have to break here in a minute, but Bonnie, we've said how great this is. I want to make a special kind of thank you to the providers. I know that a lot of where we are today is because of their input and helping us get there. And so I see some of them out in the audience today. I just want to say thank you to the providers, because you're kind of helping us, like I said, build that plane in the air as we go.
I'm sorry, I was waiting for the general public comment moment. Was that it?
That was, but if you've got something to say, go ahead.
Okay, well, I actually came here today to speak about some other things, which I was going to leave for Izzy to discuss.
You'll have to do that at the very end.
I'm sorry?
If it's not about this topic, then it'll be at the very end of the meeting.
Okay, well, that's I mean, is that where we're at?
No.
Okay.
In a little while.
Okay,
In a
all
little
right,
while.
thank you.
And this is going to be kind of a screwy meeting anyway, because we have to recess this one, start another one, do that one. Won't take very long, and then we'll go back to the other meeting. So, speaking of, it's close enough.
It's 5.
Oh, 5:00. Okay, it's 5 o'clock. Okay, at this point, I want to go ahead and I want to recess our regular meeting and call to order our next meeting, which is the Children's Trust public hearing for the budget. And the first thing to do is call to order, and then we'll have Ashley do a roll call.
Present.
She's here.
Here.
I'm here, but let me ask a question. Since I can't vote in this, do you count me for quorum?
Madam Chair, we will count Judge Ferraro for quorum for the budget, but not the trim.
Thank you.
Okay.
Member Dr. Hart. Member Dr. Lombardo.
Here.
Member Peterson.
Here.
Member Twan.
Here.
Okay. We will begin with the introduction to the public hearing on Children's Trust of Alachua County fiscal year 24-25, the tentative budget. The Children's Trust of Alachua County convenes the public hearing on fiscal year 24-25 proposed millage rate and tentative budget as required by the Florida statutes, chapters 125 and 200, as advertised in the Truth in Millage Trim notices. This evening, we will take several actions related to the adoption of the proposed millage rate and tentative budget. The final public hearing on these matters will be held on Monday, September 23rd, 2024, at 5:01 p.m. in this same manner. I urge you, if you have not already done so, to get a copy of the agenda so you may fall asleep so you may easily follow the proceedings this evening. Citizens' comments will be taken following the overview of the tentative budget by the Executive Director. The Trust Council will now present an overview in the Truth of Millage legislation, followed by the Executive Director's explanation on the proposed rate. And at this time, I'll turn it over to our council.
In 1980, the Florida legislature adopted what is known as the Truth in Millage legislation, or TRIM as it's called. The goal of the legislation was to ensure that taxpayers were advised of the public hearings at which the local taxing authorities' budgets and millage rates were to be considered and adopted. Each year, the property appraiser completes an assessment of the value of all property and certifies to each taxing authority the taxable value of the property within its jurisdiction. Each taxing authority then notifies the property appraiser of its proposed millage rate, its rolled back rate, and the date, time, and place of the public hearing to consider the proposed millage rate and the tentative budget. Once the property appraiser receives the information, she sends a notice by first-class mail to every taxpayer on the assessment roll. The notice contains the information from the taxing authorities as to the proposed millage rate and the time and place of the public hearing. The notice sent to taxpayers is called the TRIM notice. The TRIM notice lists what the taxes were for the prior year, what the taxes will be if the proposed budget changes are made, and what the taxes will be if no budget changes are made. The purpose of the TRIM notice is to provide taxpayers with sufficient basic information to enable them to participate in the public hearing process.
Madam Executive Director.
The requirement of the Truth in Millage legislation is to provide information about the maximum allowable millage rate of 0.5 versus the rollback rate. The rollback rate is defined as the millage rate which, exclusive of new construction, additions to structure, deletion, and property added due to geographic boundary change, will provide the same ad valorem tax revenue for each taxing authority as was levied during the prior year. The proposed millage rate of 0.45 provides for fiscal year 24-25 programming needs, adequate staffing, and planning for future programming needs. For the 24 tax year, the rollback rate calculation is 0.4299 mils. The recommended proposed millage for FY 24-25 budget is the rate of 0.45. Mr. Chair, the Children's Trust tentative budget for fiscal year 24-25 is $17,631,434. This budget reflects the board's recommendations to increase grants and aid funding by 18.8% and to decrease operations and administration funding by 5.7%. The adjustments to the budget reflect the fiscal year 24-25 rate of 0.45 plus previously collected ad valorem taxes from the property appraiser. The fiscal year 24-25 budget includes continued funding of community providers that have demonstrated the ability to provide results that align with our goals. Additionally, funds in each goal category are allocated to support the Trust's strategic plan. The budget has been developed to link funding with the Trust's desired goals while remaining flexible enough to respond to changing circumstances. Mr. Chair, this concludes my comments on the fiscal year 24-25 proposed budget.
Thank you. I would like to now invite citizens to comment on the fiscal year 24-25 proposed millage rate and tentative budget. Members of the public recognized by the chair will have 3 minutes to speak on the subject of the trim hearing. The clerk of the trust will function as the official timekeeper. Members of the public may not share or transfer all or part of their allotted time to any other person. The hearing will continue until everyone who wishes to address the board has had the opportunity to speak. So, anybody who would like to speak about the budget or the millage rate, please come forward at this time. Okay. Anybody online? Okay. I will now close the public comment section of the public hearing. Now we have the board actions.
Mr. Chair, any adjustments to the 24-25 tentative budget can be made by motion at this time.
Any adjustments? Okay. Florida statutes require the name of the taxing authority and the millage rate to be levied to be publicly announced. Accordingly, the Children's Trust of Alachua County has determined that the proposed millage rate of 0.45 mils is necessary to fund the. That's
right.
Okay. Overall, to fund the tentative Children's Trust of Alachua County budget, the proposed FY 2024-25 operating millage rate is 0.4500 mils, which is greater than the rollback rate of 0.4299 mils by 10.2%.
Mr. Chair, I move adoption of Resolution 2024-10 establishing fiscal year 25 proposed Children's Trust of Alachua County millage rate.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? There being none, all those in favor of the motion, you want to do roll call? Aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Correct.
Aye.
Mr. Chair,
Go ahead.
Mr. Chair, I move adoption of Resolution 2024-11 adopting changed revenue estimates in fiscal year 25 tentative Children's Trust of Alachua County budget.
A motion and a second. Any discussion? There being none, all those in favor of the motion, Ashley? Aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, this concludes the tentative budget hearing, and I will adjourn this meeting, and we'll crank up the other one. Okay, I believe the next item was the recommendation for awards. Who's going to present that?
Christie.
Christie.
You haven't missed a beat.
He got a little stumbled up with that.
Good evening. In your packet, you have the PowerPoint as well as supporting documentation for the enrichment RFP. Before we go into details about the recommendation, I'd like to, for the board as well as any members of the public, provide a recap of the actual RFP and the information found there. The enrichment RFP was released to seek opportunities that provide children and youth with educational programming and activities. Those activities extending beyond the normal after school, the normal summer camp programming, and regular school days. The purpose of these programs is to address youth needs in many different areas such as cultural, social, emotional, arts, STEM, and recreation. We allocated $250,000 for services in Alachua County, specifically for children and youth. All contracted providers through this RFP will have access to 2 years of funding, that funding being contingent upon the success of their first year. As mentioned earlier, enrichment programming addresses areas such as cultural, social, emotional, art, STEM, and recreation. This RFP received proposals from providers in the areas listed on the PowerPoint. As you can see there, health and wellness, leadership, life management skills, career exploration, STEM, social, emotional well-being, awareness, arts and culture, as well as other areas that were suggested. It will be the responsibility of the provider to identify and recruit eligible sites throughout Alachua County. There are many site options in our county. For an example, parks, the Parks and Recs Department in our municipality, schools, faith communities, youth, civic groups. But also to support the enrichment providers, the trust did identify sites for them in each municipality, and we provided that information as a resource within the packet for the RFP, so they had an opportunity to look at what those suggestions were as they were applying for the funding. In addition, the trust is also working on a mechanism for the public to apply to become an enrichment site via our website. So there's some additional effort we did here, the board as well as other providers, suggesting our showing and supporting them in identifying some additional sites. And so we have thought that through, provided some one-pagers as well as creating an easier way for sites to become an eligible site for enrichment. Services to rural communities is a requirement to receive this funding. We did highlight specific rural municipalities that allowed applicants to receive bonus points, but the expectation is that they will all provide services in our rural areas. Funding from the trust will cover reasonable costs per session for programming and activities delivered to those eligible sites. The cost per session will include direct expenses necessary to offer full sessions, as well as budgets only including individuals that are actually providing the actual service for enrichment. On this slide, you'll see the different criteria that each applicant was scored. You'll also see how the bonus points were provided as it relates to rural areas, as it relates to evidence-based and research-informed, and then seeing here that organizations with the highest scores, those scores between 80 and 100, or actually 70 and 100, would be available for the next phase of recommendation and contract negotiation. As it relates to performance measures, as it is with all of our contracts, we are looking at how much, how well, better off. We're looking at the number of sites. We're looking at the sessions completed. We did add a service provision for rural areas, and that is 30%. We'll also look at partner satisfaction, quality of programming, and then youth enjoyment and engagement for Better Off, as well as youth discovery as it relates to knowledge, skills, behavior, and exposure. I know this is small, but that is also why we provided you with a copy in your packet outside of the PowerPoint. I believe it is on page 133. What this slide shows you, as we are recommending an allocation of $1 million for enrichment. The funding was split in three different phases, three different categories rather. For those that scored 100 points or higher, it is 100% of the proposed amount that we are suggesting for that pool of applicants. For the second tier, at 75% of the proposed funding, we are looking to fund those organizations within that pool, which is 75% of their proposed dollars. And then the same for tier 3. We're looking at funding them within 50% of that proposed area. We know that there has been some communication, some interest with the trust identifying different ways to fund our providers. I know we're looking to phase out of the trust being 100% of those budgets. This is our first step. It will look different every time we have an RFP, but we're starting to think about that. We're starting to think about that as we approach fiscal year 26. And so this is our first step in doing that for our enrichment providers. And again here, yes.
Before you go forward, can I ask a question?
Yes.
I have two questions, actually. The Santa Fe College one, what is that?
So Santa Fe College is looking to expand the career exploration, the intro to the next phase beyond high school, and they have proposed a program that will address that outside of Santa Fe Achieve. They have Santa Fe Achieve, but they are looking to be more visible in the community throughout the county to introduce those options for our graduating seniors as it relates to careers, college, what those steps are, how to apply. That is what that is.
Okay. And then my second question, I'm trying to track with you on, you said the 3 tiers of funding. The first level was 100% of what they requested in their app.
Yes.
And then the second level, I take it's between it says eligible for up to 75% of proposed funding. That's what got me. Is it 75, like did you look at the bucket of our money or 75% of what was in their application?
So what we did was we took that 1.1 million and took 75% of that. We are looking to stay within the 75% range of that pot for specifically tier 2 to fund those providers, taking into consideration their score as well as contract negotiation.
Please forgive me. How did you get the
no
1.1
problems.
million?
If I'm not answering it, just keep asking.
So Christy, if we could just go to page 111. Yeah, that's the page. So what Tina's asking is, I think, Tina, correct me if I'm wrong, does the 137, the 1.1, and the 217 total the 1.5 million of total requested? Or 1.484 total requested?
Oh, I'm on 111. Okay. Tell me your question again, please.
Yeah, I think that's the answer, Tina.
I think that's the answer.
The 100% totals is 137. The 75% totals is 1.129.
Yes.
The 50% totals is 217.
Yes.
And the total of those is 1.484, which is 100% of what they requested. And then they took 75% of those that scored 75 or better, and 50% of those that scored.
Yes.
Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay.
And that total got you down to $1,093,000.
Yes.
Approximately. The green number.
And the color coding, the kind of peach is
So
more
the-
than one goal.
Yes. So when we released the funds, you all were interested in knowing what goals they fell in. And so those with the peach color, they selected goals 1 and 2. And so I just wanted to identify or point that out for the board so they could see exactly where that funding was coming from and what category they fell within.
So how do we get from 250,000 allocated to wanting to $1 million?
Yeah. Well,
That's the big question today.
I just kind of.
So
We're now at the recommendation. Okay.
Yeah.
Mr. Chair.
Okay, I didn't know if you wanted me to answer that or.
Back to him. He's back.
Okay, may I
He
answer?
was filling me in, please.
Okay. So at the board meeting, you all suggested that we come back and make an ask based on what we received. Also, where the programs fell as it relates to our goals, and they are all goal 1 and 2. And when we look at our fund balance, there are dollars that are going to be there to support increasing our enrichment services. You all also were really interested in expanding our reach, expanding the type of enrichment services that the trust could offer throughout the county, and we knew that $250,000 wasn't going to get us there. And so with this increase in funding, it really does allow us to reach more. There's a focus in addition to our greater Gainesville area or even some of our rural areas where most of our service providers kind of flock to because it's not easier, but they have relationships there. This pushes them beyond their comfort zone and gets them into those rural areas where services are limited. So the dollars are available in fund balance for that fiscal year. And I should probably stop there in case I need to turn it over to Scott to talk about that specifically.
I guess so it is coming from fund balance, not from unallocated, because we still had a lot of money in some of the other goals that was unallocated.
And goal 1 specifically.
And goal 1 especially, and if most of these programs fit that, I mean, my preference is not to do recurring expenses out of fund balance. But we did have a lot of money sitting unallocated for those other goal areas that I'm perfectly happy to see this. And it's, again, I love enrichment activities. I think they're what can add a lot to what the kids experience. But at the end of the day, it's fund balance for recurring expenses.
Mr. Chair, if I
Yes.
may, if I'm not mistaken, and I see Scott is looking it up, there was about $400,000+ left over in goal 1 from, was it youth? From youth health. When we had the workshop, we had this conversation about the fact that we knew the $250,000 was not going to be enough for enrichment. Now, at that time, we didn't know that we were going to have well over, 19 applicants for enrichment. But we were, and I was really intentional about the fact that we wanted to be able to provide these enrichment services outside of Gainesville. And if you all will remember, a couple of providers even spoke up at that meeting about, would they be required to provide, the enrichment external to Gainesville? And we said yes. So while I hear a bit of hesitation about the dollar amount, we truly believe that these are dollars that will be well spent. Anytime that we can broaden our reach, and that's exactly what enrichment does. It's schools, it's churches, it's those clubs that offer, programs for kids in neighborhoods that potentially the trust just would not reach, would not touch. So I would ask you to please consider this recommendation. Scott, did you find what you were looking for? And I'll be quiet.
Thank you, E.D. Kiner. I'll comment. This is fiscal year 25 budget, right, that we're talking about. So when we look at the budget for 25, there's I'll say broadly, a commitment of 2.5 million for fiscal year 25, 1.7 in prior commitments of fund balance that are already on the books, and 825,000 of current year unallocated funding. So just in broad context, if that's helpful, Member Labarda, in terms of your question.
Ken?
So I love the recommendation. I would say that I feel like we are here where we were with after school a year or two ago, and I really want to kind of make this step and see how this works. I will say that I think moving into next year, that one of the things we will need to look at, I mean, funding 17 out of the 19 organizations is great. It just worked out that we got 75%, but I think we're going to need to look at, a maximum amount that you can apply for. And again, what is that as a percentage of your operating budget? There's a couple of really big ones on here, which I'm happy to do this year. I think that's fine. But what I don't want to get into is the trust is, again, supporting an entire organization. And so I just want to kind of make that comment preemptively of next year. We did ask the staff to come back and say, how can we spend this money in a creative way to achieve our goals? And so I'm happy to move forward with the recommendation. I like it, and I like funding a lot of different organizations so that we can then start to Bonnie is no, Bonnie's still there. You have Bonnie say, how are we going to measure? And I think that's going to be our biggest challenge this year. And I would say using these organizations, like we did with the after-school organizations, to tell us how they're measuring is going to be a big, big component of this. But I know a number of these organizations well, and they're doing the incredible work. But not for them, we would have lots of other public issues that they are really addressing, from gun violence to across the board. So I'm ready to move forward with the recommendation when everybody else is.
I'll yield to Edie Kiner.
I'll be brief. That part of the reason why this recommendation was only a 2-year was for that specific reason, Member Cornell. So I just wanted to say that we understood. We heard you all loudly and clearly that we don't want to fund 100% of programs moving forward. So this was our first attempt. We are meeting with the county to have a discussion about how they are looking at their funding. So I expect that as we begin to release RFPs moving forward, you will see more and more of that coming this way.
Thank you.
And then Member Hart.
Thank you. So you answered one of my questions. I was wondering if it was a 2-year or a 3-year, because we're going to be hitting fund balance in year 2, if I understood Scott correctly. Right, so that does make me pause. But I like the idea of us hitting more. But did you, in looking at the RFP this year, did you look at this to see how much a percentage of our funding was of their budget? Like with the applications this year, did we do that?
Yes, we did. So each applicant had to ask or answer a question about our percentage of their budget, as well as if we reduced their proposed request by 50%, would they be able to continue the program? All of them who applied stated yes, if the funding amount was reduced, that they could continue. However, there would be reductions in either the number of sessions, of course, which means a reduction in the number of children that are reached. As it relates to the percentage of our funding, they all answered it differently, right? Some of them answered that question based on the program budget. Some of them answered it based on the organization's budget, and so there's a little bit of more investigation we need to do there, but there were, of the 19, I believe, only 4 of them that stated 100% of their proposed request was 100% from the trust. So
Thank you. So then my other question and the concern that Judge Farrow and that we've talked about as a board is the high cost per thing, and I'm wondering if we want to start to address that now, because if we don't do it in this year, we're going to have to have that conversation next year, and it's one that we kind of been kicking the can down the road on. So although I do like the proposal of us pushing out, it gives me pause that there are two programs that have really high costs per session, and when you look at the other applications. So I don't know, does staff have a recommendation on us to bring to the board and how we're going to look at that, or Member Pinkerson and
I think they want us to help them with some sort of policy.
But will we have the policy before we approve this? Because if we approve this we're funding at this higher level.
Yeah.
So I don't think we can have the policy now because it takes too long to go through the rulemaking to have a policy. We've got to have some type of guidelines in this.
I was going
right
to say,
here
I don't think right now we would be talking about a policy, but you could certainly give us some direction based on what you would like for us to do as we go into contract negotiations, because, and Christy can speak to it better than I do, that's where we really get into the nuts and bolts of what they're doing, what the actual costs are, putting together budgets. That's when we would be able to do some form of a reduction.
I'm sorry, say it again, remember?
I mean, I hear loud and clear what you're saying, and I looking at this cost per session number, that's what you're focusing in on?
Yes, yes, I was looking at that.
Yeah, so I would be comfortable in this initial year of moving forward with the recommendation and limiting that the cost per session could not exceed 1,000. That would push some difficult discussions with three of the vendors, and it would, and that's approximately $400,000.
Four vendors, right?
4 vendors, sorry.
Yeah, oh, the one, the orange, yeah, I'm sorry, I missed that one. Yeah.
So per session is for the whole thing. It's not, I mean, to me, it's more of a per child issue. And so, I mean, because some of these, the number of sessions varies. So it's one session you're considering like one day or one meeting time or one event. Okay. Okay. And go ahead.
Cost per, I'm sorry.
Go ahead,
Cost
no,
per
go.
session for, just look at the first one, the 50943. Says cost per session, dollar amount, 50943, dollar amount 24,452.76. So it says number of sessions. So is that 100 kids per session? Is that 1 kid per session?
So keep in mind that when they are recruiting sites, they are recruiting a site not knowing how many children are in attendance until they get there, until they speak to that individual. We set, I believe, a minimum. Do you remember what the minimum?
No, that's good.
They had to have at least 5 kids in the session to continue to move forward. We did that because of our rural areas.
Okay.
They may have
That's
lower
okay.
numbers.
I'm not questioning
Okay.
that. I'm not
Yeah.
questioning that part. I'm just saying, if there's 48 sessions, you would expect to have at least a minimum number of 5 children per session.
Yes.
Okay, that helps. Can some accommodate more than 5 kids?
It absolutely can. We want there to be, 20, 50,
Okay.
as many as possible.
Because
It
that makes a
depends
difference,
on
I
the
think.
type of site that they are recruiting.
And how
Yeah.
long are the sessions? So like a session,
It varies. Some sessions might be an hour. Some sessions might be an hour and a half. So it varies based on each proposal, depending on what they're doing. Some
for
sessions.
example, underground kitchen.
Underground kitchen, it's not 30 minutes. They are cooking, they are going through nutritional facts. It could be at a minimum hour and a half, 2 hours.
Okay, I need to get Dr. Hart in here. Dr. Hart?
Hi. I am sort of stuck on the fact that these are all from goals 1 and 2, and it makes me a little nervous because I think one of our other goals is safety. And I had sort of thought that we would have some things addressing safety in this group, and I'm not really worried about the total amount of money as much as I am worried about the scope of all of these enrichment activities. And maybe, Christy, I totally trust you to be able to go through these contract negotiations and whittle this amount of money down. I'm not really worried about that. It's not the money, it's the scope.
Did you want to go to?
Did I want to go where?
Did you want
Oh,
to speak?
Speak. Oh, yeah, I did. I have one more question. I see like UF Museum is on here. I just read they're going to be closed because of renovation. Is
I
that
read it also. That those are the things that come up in contract negotiation. I saw it as well, and I emailed it to myself. I saw Alberto was in the back. We see those types of things also, and we have conversations with them, and we say, tell us what's going on. So your programs department, we saw it.
Okay.
And we'll have that question for them, how they intend to, meet the needs of this application. So we also saw it.
Okay, any further questions?
So I don't.
I have one.
Okay, Maggie.
So you said a number of these organizations, we're 100% of their total funding from everywhere, and they may end up being cut from 100% to 50% of their funding, and I worry if 100% of your costs are coming from one source, and now I cut it in half, how much of that is just going to be overhead and not being able to deliver an actual service?
Yeah, who are the 4 that are 100%? Because we can get right to it. I agree with you.
The first one is All Well Health, and they are not being funded because they did not meet the cut.
Wait, they're on the
I
list.
thought on 133. They're on page 133. That was meant the funding.
Uh-oh. I can't see.
I mean, that's a small amount, too.
Yeah, that's a small amount. It's in the middle of.
I see it. I'm sorry. I see it. So All Well Health. DJ Elo Global is 100%. I believe at about $49,000. Yes.
That's one of the ones we're going to limit the session.
Yeah, but it's not much.
Correct.
It's not much.
So basically, these are likely to be volunteer-run organizations, all volunteer and no
And the other 2?
Not doing
What are the other
an
2?
audit or.
doing anything.
Santa Fe College is 100%.
Which one?
Santa Fe College.
Yeah, but that's a program within a huge organization that can afford all kinds of, to support those kinds of things. That doesn't worry me. So that's what I mean. It's got to be, the percentage has to be of the organization's total budget.
And the last one, Chrissy?
The last one is 98%, and that is the high-class educated role models. And then there's also another one at 90%, which is the music and arts program for youth.
Okay, those are fine.
So the other one is the her.
Okay. The
Empire.
HER we're going to address with the other part. Okay. All right, you ready?
Okay, any further questions?
Chairman Peterson, my understanding is it's up to the amount that we approve, but it will be negotiated and executed by staff. So approving an amount doesn't guarantee execution of a contract.
Right.
Correct?
Correct.
That's correct. Mr. Chair, may I?
Okay.
Mr. Chair.
Motion?
Wait, no. Let's ask. Christy got a response.
I just wanted to ask you all to approve the staff negotiating the contracts. We normally try to stay away of approving an amount because then the providers want the amount.
And when will these negotiations, what's the time frame?
Over the next several weeks.
Next several weeks, okay.
So go ahead. You make a motion.
All right, so I would move, so staff's recommendation, 1, approve resolution 2024-09, enrichment RP award recommendation not to exceed $1 million. 2, authorize staff to negotiate and execute contracts with organizations that score 70 or higher. Part 3, bring back to us within 45 days a report of what was not spent so that we can have a discussion about perhaps reallocating that to those that we've negotiated contracts with.
Cost of service.
What's that?
Max cost of service. Cost per session.
And then the last part, part 4, is to limit the cost per session not to exceed $1,000 per session, and bring back to the board a discussion about how those 4 organizations adjusted their programming. I guess that's the motion.
Second.
You have a motion and a second. Discussion among board members.
We just had it. I'm good.
Okay, everybody good? Okay, we're going to open up to the public. You heard the motion, it's a 4-part motion. So if you would like to come address the board about that motion, this would be the appropriate time. Good afternoon.
Jeff Parker from IGB Education. First of all, I just want to thank all of you for the hard work and dedication you have to helping the youth of Alachua County. The work of your staff as a contract provider through the mentoring grant last year has been very beneficial to our children, and the hard work and their dedication to help us improve as an organization has been very beneficial. I do have an ask, considering the motion that's just being considered. So I have my question is, in light of the additional funds being proposed, will we be allowed, as the initial RFP responders, will we be allowed to adjust our ask? And I ask that because when I sit down, I'm new at writing grants. I mean, I've helped kids for 25 years, but I'm new at the grant process. And when somebody puts on a piece of paper and they tell me that it's $250,000 that's available, I'm going to base my programming on what's available. And I've written grants that are $1 million grants, and I've written proposals based on $1 million of availability. But when I looked at the $250,000, I knew of 10 of the providers that have applied. I knew there wasn't going to be a big pot of money. And I based that based on the after-school RFP that you mentioned a few minutes ago, and then also my involvement with the mentoring grant last year, in the sense that we came in, we were above the threshold, but because we were not where the money was allocated, we weren't initially going to be funded for our programming. So when I wrote the grant to answer the $200,000, it was based on or for $250,000, it was based on that amount. Now when I see a proposal that's based on $1 million, I would have adjusted our proposal that we gave. And obviously our proposal was considered and deemed to be effective because we had the highest score rated on the RFP answer. So my question to you as a board is, will we be allowed to adjust our numbers, because you took the input of the board and everything to adjust your numbers? Will we be allowed to adjust, because we will increase our scope, our reach, and our programming to the children of Alachua County?
Speaking as one board member, and there are a few of us up here, I would say no. Simply, we increase the amount so that we could get more programs, and I think that's probably...
That's the third part of my motion. That's why I put the third part of my motion in.
But the unallocated, that's not.
And when staff comes back to us after negotiating the contracts, there's going to be a pool of money.
Right.
That is not, and there's going to be scoring, and there's discussions with all the other providers. I would hope that staff says, there could have been some of these, and we are recommending the following additional allocations.
So it's to be determined.
Yeah, I mean, I think it reflects, if you look at the score of the top 4, I think we all took in consideration, because we only came back at $137,000. I mean, it's shame on me, because if I'd have known what I know, I would have asked for the full $250 and let you figure out how you're going to fund the rest of it.
And I understand that.
Yep.
Mr. Chair.
That's why I did the third part.
Anyone else?
Here comes someone now.
That's the Florida Museum. You have an answer.
Good afternoon.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Alberto Lopez from the Florida Museum of Natural History. I'm the manager of museum education. And I just want to clarify, yes, we've been in the news lately, and it's very hard, right? It's a really big hit for the community. And we are just wanted to let you know that, so basically the physical building itself, yes, it will be closed. That is true, but all our outreach initiatives are continuing to happen. All these, what we propose basically, are all efforts that will be done outside of the building. So in fact, this closure does not affect anything at all in our RFP. In fact, it makes it even more important. Yeah.
Thank you.
Chair, Pinkerton, I had asked because in the article that was like 20 some odd staff people that were I don't know if furlough is the right word or if that's the right word for it or not. That's why I was wondering. It was almost like the operations were going to kind of be paused. So that's why I was asking.
Good question.
I asked that question.
Anyone else? Okay. All right. So,
Ken's got a hand. Finger.
yes, sir.
Just discussion. So we've talked a lot about cost per session, cost per child. You guys have heard a lot of our concerns, and to the speaker's point, that's why I put that third part is really to give staff some leeway here as you're going through. Again, we're building the plane in the air this first year with increased funding. Where are the opportunities of the $1 million that doesn't go under contract? And in 45 days, bring back some of those recommendations to us. Have your conversations with the 17 that were awarded. Thank you for the organizations that submitted proposals and were scored. This is our first time, and we're going to learn a lot from this, but I think we'll have an opportunity to make some good decisions in a couple months.
Well, I think staff would probably like some recommendations or some, what we think, whether or not part of that includes increasing the amount for the ones that have already been approved.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, my one board member, that if you see organizations that have increased capacity and the cost per session is on the lower end with a lot more kids, heck yeah, I want to hear that.
I agree.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah.
Christy, got a question?
Chrissy.
I'd like to include in that recommendation our current policy as it relates to funding that's left closer to them meeting the intent of their performance measures. I'd like to see how they do. I don't want to make a suggestion at the beginning of their contract that we increase their funding, therefore increase their numbers until we see them do some of the work. We are going from 7 enrichment providers to 19. I'd like to see them do some of the work. I'd like to see that they are making good strides before we amend their budget and increase the amount. The funding will be there. That's a policy that we've created already for this organization. Midway through the contract year, we can come back to you all and say, this enrichment provider is doing well. We have these dollars left over, and so we'd like to then increase their funding from there.
So what you're recommending, Chrissy, is that you won't necessarily come back with a recommendation when we're asking you to, maybe later into the process when they're already running their program. Is that what I'm understanding? Y'all good with that? My opinion would be to let's let staff, they're the ones who do this.
Yeah, and I will say I hear you loud and clear, but I also understand math. And when you apply for 200,000 and you get 75% of that, you're at 150. And so, and you can game the math. You can game the math in that system, yes and no, because we are awarding.
Well, there you go. That's.
Well, I mean, if we would have said to the 17 or 19 providers that the amount's $1 million, we might have gotten different proposals.
But then again, Ken, you have to look at it is that.
I think we got true numbers
We're
this
being
time.
kind of okay. We realize that we're going into our reserves so that we can
Yes.
make this a little bit better.
Well, my opening comment was we're going to have to come up with, here's the max you can apply for. That's just the max you can apply for, because we had the situation at the county commission last 2 weeks ago with the CAP funding where we had $1,350,000 allocated. We had one provider apply for $500,000. It was their first time, and it just threw everything out of whack. And when you have a process of, if you score between here and here, you get 75% of your request, then the request becomes really, really important. And 25, to IGB's point, 25,000 requested of 250 is 10%. But if it were $1 million, maybe they would have applied for 100,000. And that's my only point. And so I don't want to wait a year to try to correct that if we know we can do a lot of good with entities that have the capacity, scored well, and But I will yield to staff, and I'll stop.
Could
I'll be
we say,
quiet.
instead of 45 days, could we say 90 days or maybe 120, and we give a little bit more time instead of it being 45 days?
Marcia?
And sorry, Maggie. Maggie was before me, but two comments. One, 45 days, they'll still be negotiating contracts, quite frankly, at end of year already. So we're going to need more than 45 days. And I think what you just said, Ken, is really important. Organizations that have capacity. I think we learned a lot. You all are going to hear about it. Is it November? Christy, when we're going to come and talk to you about all those mentoring programs, we learned a lot. Folks do good work, but they don't have the capacity. And so as we talk about increasing some organizations that may not have capacity, we're going to find ourselves back in some of the situations we were in with a number of our mentoring programs that just weren't able to do what we asked them to do. And that's where staff is coming from.
And we don't know what attendance is going to be yet. Go ahead, Maggie.
So that's where I was going to go. So there's capacity. Can the organization take on additional responsibilities? Do they have the capacity to staff up? Do they have the infrastructure to get it built? Do they have all of the things that they need to make the programming happen in a sustainable way? But then there's demand. And when you're starting up something from scratch, which this is for a lot of these organizations, you know, a budget and a proposal is a vision, it's a hope. You know, we hope that we're going to be able to offer these services and that enough kids will come. I think until we know which sites are going to have enough demand, we don't know how much capacity we really need in terms of just sheer numbers that we can serve. So I would support Christie's and staff's recommendation that we not get ahead of ourselves and say, oh, I would have asked for a much greater amount had I known. Let's see. And if there are programs that have people knocking down their door and we don't have enough staff or enough volunteers, but we can get them, then those are the places where I would support funding. I don't think we need to do a blanket, oh, we'll have money left over just as soon as contracts are renegotiated.
Okay, I think there's a consensus on that. Judge? Excuse
So,
me, Member Ferrero.
Oh.
Excuse me.
I think both are fine. Maybe you could call me, or I don't know, people call me other things. Okay.
I'm not going to do that.
So, this is sort of the drum I've been beating for many months, and I briefly talked to Marcia about it, and she assured me that this issue of trauma-informed and trauma-responsive training is going to be built into these contracts. So I just want to thank you for that, and also remember that that's something that I certainly am going to be looking for, because I think that's really critical. Not just, again, I see we have background screens, fine, that's important, but we need to have these groups commit to doing this training and not just, you know, clicking a few boxes online, but like getting some deep training, maybe with the CAC or whoever else you want to hire. So thank you.
Any further comments? Shane?
I was going to echo what Dr. Labarta said, that capacity, demand, and wait lists, you know, as they negotiate, that all of that can be data that they bring back to us, because some people will have the capacity, the demand, and they establish wait lists that they can bring back as evidence as to a request for more support. Thank you.
And but I don't want to lose sight of what Ken brought up, a really good point about the maximum that you can ask for in these RFPs, and I don't think that's been a factor in the previous RFPs. So we need to, you know, going forward, that needs to be a discussion. So you're good with. Everybody's
yeah, I'm
good
with
with
bringing back the number, and then we'll get the recommendations later.
That staff will come back later with a recommendation. Later, as far as there are going to be two laters, one initial and then one later after there's been some evaluation that takes place. Okay. Any further discussion? Okay. On the motion, just want to make sure everybody had an opportunity to say their piece if they would like. Okay. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, motion's unanimous. Thank you all very much for your input. We appreciate it. The next item will be general public comments. So I know that there's at least one person that had some general comments. So come on up. This is Tom.
Hello. I'm Dr. Corey Cheval. I'm the founder and director of the Gainesville Circus Center. And I actually came here to speak about another topic, but I'm going to leave that to my youth program coordinator, Ms. Isabel Brazel, because of some comments that were made earlier in the meeting. I thought it would be important to address them since I'm here. So there was a question raised of, why is circus so expensive? And it's a really valid question. What we're talking about is, why have the arts been relegated to wealthy, high-income families throughout, most of memorable time in our culture? That's what we're trying to combat here. It is expensive to do art. It is expensive to do this elite training. There are 3 factors that contribute to that. 1 is high-quality staff, 2 is ratios, and 3 is insurance. So on the topic of high-quality staff, I have been teaching here in Gainesville for over 12 years. It's a college town. We have a transient employment base, and it's really difficult to do business with transient employees. So what I found and actually learned with the Children's Trust through the capacity grant that we received a few years ago is that if you invest in your team, they will stay. So I have, for the last several years, been working so hard to get the mid-level career artists to stay here in Gainesville and work with us, and not keep relying on the 18 to 22-year-olds who aren't going to be around. As I'm sure many of you know, the cost of employee turnover estimates somewhere, as much as half that employee's salary is what it's costing us to keep hiring and retraining people. Also, it's not just whatever person who can teach aerial acrobatics and also be an empathic mentor and also be an artist, because our staff need to be highly trained in the art, which is unique and rare and hard to find. They need to be trained in teaching that art, because being able to perform it and teach it are 2 different things, and they have to be able to do both to work in our program. And then they also have to meet the child care qualifications. So I pride myself on paying my staff a living wage. It's still not what I would like to pay them. And just for the record, even as the founder and director, my family qualifies for the scholarships offered by my program. So it's not like I'm taking home all these funds. The next thing is ratios. So the Department of Children and Families indicates that for school-age children, which is what we work with, we can have a ratio of 1 to 25. But in our industry, circus arts, which we are members of the American Circus Educators Organization, the American Circus Safety Network, the American Youth Circus Organization, these are longstanding organizations that, providers like mine, we all get together and have our own conference because our industry is so unique, and we're all working with children, and we're all working with the difficulty of doing circus and all of that. Our safety standard, which is very similar to the U.S. Gymnastics Association, is 1 to 8. So already, just on a staffing ratio, we are 3 times more expensive than a program that is offering something that is considered inherently less dangerous.
I need to ask you to wrap it up.
Mm-hmm.
I need you to wrap it up. You have 3 minutes, and you've been through your 3 minutes.
Oh, okay. And insurance, which there is one provider in the United States that covers circus arts. The American Circus Educators Organization has a whole committee dedicated to helping providers navigate this problem, because it's a problem for all of us. And right now, that is what we have. We have one provider, and our insurance costs doubled from $18,000 to $38,000 in the last year just to meet the standards from CTAC. And our insurance provider is telling us that CTAC is requiring things that we don't actually need. So I don't know how many insurance providers you know that actually tell their clients, no, you've actually got too much coverage. But that's what our provider has told us. And we've been in other conversations with your lawyers, with our insurance providers' lawyers, to try to meet somewhere in the middle. But that's the gist of it. So it's going to be up to CTAC to decide if this is going to be something exclusively available to wealthy families in Alachua County, or if we're going to keep that door open for something truly unique and special for low-income families.
Thank you very much for your comments. Appreciate it.
Hi again. I am here to bring awareness to several challenges faced by our organization, Gainesville Circus Center, since the implementation of SAMUS. Our organization currently faces a loss of more than $8,000 between our after-school and summer contracts for the following reasons. Lost time due to SAMIS blocking a request for an amendment while waiting on another document to process, combined with lost time for a rejected reimbursement for not dividing out a payment over 12 months, and simultaneously having a document rejected for billing out over 12 months in a different category. The FICA calculation should have been dispersed at the same percentage it was calculated at the beginning of the contract, yet we have an $1,100 remaining balance that we are told we cannot access because salary funds were already dispersed. That initial calculation was made by CTAC's budget form. Had we known we are not able to or allowed to request FICA funds for a salary category that has been zeroed out, we would have requested to move funds sooner. Previously, our summer contract has allowed us the flexibility to handle the precise needs of our community. We agree to provide 8 full and 4 partial scholarships per week, but sometimes we need to apply 10 full scholarships one week and 6 the following week. The rigidity of SAMIS software does not allow to adjust enrollment as needed to handle the reality of working with families. If it were just a matter of learning to navigate an ever-evolving fiscal system, that would be manageable. What we cannot comprehend, however, is the response made by CFO Scott Sumner when we sought attendance and assistance. What we learned from Mr. Sumner is that he does not feel that this is CTAC's problem. We also learned that there are so many other providers struggling to meet the new protocols that neither he nor any of the other have the time to help. He also said that we wouldn't like it very much if he decided to do a deep dive into our fiscal and financial documents. We stand by every document we have submitted. We have always engaged in fiscal transparency, and we would like to know the intention behind Mr. Summers' comments, as they certainly did not help us do a better job at working with CTAC's new standards and procedures. In closing, we would like to thank the Children's Trust for the support we have received over the last 3.5 years of partnership. We look forward to many more years of working together to enhance our community by providing a safe place for at-risk youth to explore art.
Okay, and so have you spoken with Executive Director Connor as far as the issues that you're having?
No, this was our next step.
Okay, I would suggest that y'all have a discussion with Marcia and set up an appointment so y'all can have that discussion. Okay? All right. Any further comments from anyone? Well, thank you all very much for being here tonight. We do appreciate it this afternoon tonight. You know, y'all make us better, and thank you very, very much for everything that you do for our children. You know, y'all are going to ultimately make this county one of the best counties in the world for our children. So I appreciate that very, very much. So, any general board comments?
I just want to thank Josh for.
Thank you all for listening.
Thanks, Josh.
Did you want to say anything about this, about the schedule?
Oh, yeah, and thank you for that as well, of the schedule, what's coming up. That was very helpful.
Yeah,
Y'all,
for your information.
Okay, y'all in your packet or
No,
on
that was
your.
for you.
Oh, okay, all right.
But you
Okay.
can share it.
In the packet, my packet, I was given a process for the executive director, and what's coming up is Marcia's going to fill out an executive director self-evaluation form, and then give it to us, right? One way or another, and then by September 24th, we will have our evaluations in. The evaluations will be scored, and the comments will be sent to me, and then we'll have a discussion, and then let's see, the executive director and the board will discuss the results and recommendations on the week of September the 30th, and then the executive and board members one-on-ones September 30th through October 4th. And October 7th, the executive director evaluation and recommendations placed on our agenda. And then on the 14th, the executive director evaluation and recommendation discussed and approved at a regular trust board meeting. So we've gone from a 1-week process to about a 2.5-month process. We want to make sure that everybody gets their input in, and you know, Marcia can give the evaluations and meet with everybody just to address whatever concerns that they might have. or you can just tell her what a great job she's doing. So,
You say 2.5 months? How did you
It's not 2.5.
I was getting ready to say, because I'm sitting here thinking like, dang, how am I going to fit this into my calendar?
More like 2 weeks.
Yeah, that's,
it's a month long, September 16th through October 14th.
But I also appreciated on
Yes,
page
it's-
173 what's coming up in the
Yes.
board meetings. Thank you for providing that.
So with that, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you all very much.